Hawaii, paradise, right? Sun-drenched beaches, turquoise waves, lush green mountains that feel like something out of a dream. That's what we thought too, when my wife Sarah and I stumbled upon what felt like our perfect slice of heaven. It wasn't a beachfront villa or a swanky resort condo. It was a newly built home, modest but beautiful, nestled on the edge of a developing subdivision near Waipahu, Oahu. What sold us wasn't just the house itself, but the backyard. It backed right up against the Iolekaavalley, a vast, ancient expanse of untouched jungle, steep and verdant, disappearing into a perpetual mist. It felt wild, primal, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns of our new neighborhood. We moved in during the late 1970s. The air was thick with the scent of plumeria and wet earth, a constant symphony of tropical birdsong. Our days were filled with unpacking, exploring nearby trails, and simply basking in the novelty of our new island life. For the first few weeks, it was everything we'd hoped for. Peaceful, idyllic, a true escape. Then the whispers started. They were faint at first, so subtle I dismissed them entirely. A rustle in the dense foliage at the valley's edge, a sound like distant, hurried voices carried on the breeze. I'd shrug, attributing it to the wind playing tricks, or maybe the construction crews still working on the far side of the subdivision. Sarah heard them too, occasionally, but like me, she brushed them off. Just the jungle settling, she'd say, or must be kids playing down the street. But the sounds were never distinct enough to identify, never loud enough to pinpoint. They were always just there, on the periphery of hearing, like a secret being murmured just out of reach. It was usually at dusk, as the vibrant Hawaiian sunset bled into twilight, painting the valley in hues of deep purple and shadowy blue. The air would cool, and a thin, ethereal mist would begin to snake up from the valley floor. That's when it felt like the valley truly woke up. The birds would quiet, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the croaking of frogs. And then, woven into that nocturnal chorus, those soft, almost melancholic whispers. They had a curious quality to them, a kind of mournful cadence that wasn't right for playful children. They sounded furtive, like a shared secret, or perhaps a lament. One evening, I was out on our lanai, the wooden deck overlooking the valley, trying to fix a stubborn screen door. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the valley was swathed in that familiar, creeping mist. I heard it then clearer than before. A distinct, high-pitched giggle, followed by a sigh that sounded impossibly sad. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like a child. My heart gave a strange lurch. We didn't have kids, and none of our immediate neighbors did either. I peered into the deepening gloom, trying to make sense of it. Nothing. Just the endless green, fading to black. I remember thinking, maybe it's a stray animal. But the sound lingered in my mind, an echo of pure, unadulterated melancholy. It was the first time I felt a true shiver crawl down my spine, a feeling that had nothing to do with the cooling air. It was a premonition, a quiet dread settling in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't paradise. This was something else entirely. The incidents began to escalate, subtly at first, like the tide slowly creeping higher up the sand. The whispers became more frequent, always just beyond comprehension, a constant hushed hum emanating from the valley. Sometimes Sarah and I would catch each other's eyes, a silent acknowledgement that we both heard it, this unspoken presence. We'd try to rationalize it away, talk about the acoustics of the valley, the way sound traveled. But deep down, the explanations felt hollow. Then came the glimpses. It started with just a flicker of movement. A darting shadow at the very edge of our property line, right where the manicured lawn gave way to the wild, tangled growth of the valley. It was too small to be an adult, too quick to be an animal. And it had an unnerving shape. Not quite human, not quite anything I could identify. Just a fleeting impression of something small, dark, and utterly out of place. I'd blink, rub my eyes, and it would be gone. Just a trick of the light, I'd tell myself, a byproduct of tired eyes and an overactive imagination. But the trick of the light kept happening. Sarah saw it too. She was tending to her small orchid garden one afternoon, right near the valley's rim, when she suddenly gasped. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice tight with a fear I hadn't heard before. "Just now. It just moved. Right there, by the ironwood tree." She pointed to a dense clump of trees, their needles rustling gently in the breeze. There was nothing there now, of course, but the way her eyes darted, the pale set of her jaw, told me she wasn't imagining things. Not entirely. The feeling of being watched became pervasive. It wasn't a paranoid illusion, but a cold, heavy sensation, like unseen eyes were fixed on us whenever we were outside, especially near the valley. We found ourselves unconsciously turning our backs to the house, facing the dense green expanse, as if expecting something to emerge from its depths. It was a subtle shift in our behavior, a quiet acknowledgement of the unseen. The whispers intensified too. They no longer sounded distant. Now they seemed to swirl around us, sometimes just beyond our ears, sometimes right beside us. They had a chilling intimacy, as if whoever or whatever was making them was closer than we could possibly imagine. And then, the ultimate violation of that quiet, personal space. I was in the garage one evening, organizing tools. The garage door was open, offering a view of the darkening valley. The air was still and humid. Suddenly, clear as day, a whisper. My name. Michael. It was a child's voice, soft and breathy, tinged with that familiar, profound sadness. It was unmistakably my name, spoken with such a sorrowful inflection that it felt like a dagger to the heart. Every hair on my arm stood on end. My breath hitched in my throat. I spun around, my eyes scanning the shadows, the open doorway to the valley. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The silence that followed was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mind raced, trying desperately to find a logical explanation. Wind? A neighbor calling out? But it was too clear, too close, too distinct. And that sadness. It wasn't just in the voice. It washed over me in that moment, a wave of inexplicable grief that brought tears to my eyes. It felt like my own personal sorrow, amplified, externalized, pressing down on me. I had to grip the workbench to steady myself. From that day on, the feeling of sadness became a constant companion. It wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was a heavy cloak draped over my spirit. Sarah experienced it too. We'd find ourselves staring blankly, feeling an overwhelming sense of loss, a longing for something we couldn't name. It wasn't depression, not exactly. It was too sudden, too unprovoked, and always seemed to coincide with intensified whispers or glimpses of the shadowy figures. It was as if the valley was exhaling its grief, and we were breathing it in. The rain brought it all to a head. Heavy rains are common in Hawaii, especially in the valleys. When the sky opened up and the world became a deluge of water, the valley would transform. Rivers would swell, waterfalls would cascade down the steep slopes, and a thick, almost impenetrable mist would rise, engulfing everything. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. And during those times, the sounds became unbearable. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were almost audible conversations, a chorus of tiny, distressed voices, often punctuated by faint, sorrowful wails that seemed to echo through the mist. The laughter, when it came, wasn't joyful. It was hollow, chilling, like a sound echoing from an empty room. And the shadowy figures? They were bolder, appearing closer to the house, sometimes even seeming to flit across our back porch, disappearing before we could truly register them. They were small, no taller than a young child, and they moved with an unnatural speed, a blur of darkness against the green. One particularly stormy night, the rain was coming down in sheets, drumming a furious rhythm on the roof. The valley was completely shrouded in mist, the visibility zero. Sarah and I were huddled in the living room, trying to distract ourselves with a movie, but the sounds from outside were too distracting. The whispers were swirling around the house, sounding almost like they were inside with us. And then I heard it again. Her name, Sarah. It was the same melancholic child's voice, but this time it seemed to come from a hallway just beyond the living room door. Sarah froze, her eyes wide, staring at the darkened hallway. We both heard it. It wasn't a trick of the acoustics, it was there. The air in the room grew cold, an unnatural chill that prickled my skin. And with it, that familiar wave of profound, soul-crushing sadness washed over us both, so intense it felt physical. We just sat there, clutching each other, listening to the ghostly chorus that surrounded our home. It sounded like children playing a mournful game, just out of sight, just beyond our grasp. It was then that the true, horrifying realization dawned on me. These weren't residual echoes of past. These weren't just strange atmospheric phenomena. These were beings. They were aware. They were intelligent. And they were trying to communicate. The historical context of the valley, something I'd vaguely heard about from a local realtor, came flooding back. Yuhane, spirits of the deceased, unable to find their way. The particularly precious nature of children in Hawaiian tradition, and the possibility of unmarked burial sites palapeep in these agricultural lands. It all clicked into place with a horrifying finality. These were the lost children of the valley, disturbed by the concrete and foundations of our new homes, crying out from their timeless limbo. The sadness wasn't just an external feeling anymore. It felt like their sadness, pouring into us a desperate, silent plea from spirits trapped between worlds. They weren't malevolent, not truly. They were just lost and lonely. And we, unknowingly, had built our dream home on top of their quiet, forgotten suffering. That night, we barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, every drop of rain felt like a whisper, a silent accusation. The next morning, as the sun bravely tried to pierce through the lingering mist, we made a decision. A silent, unspoken agreement. We couldn't stay. This wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum of unseen sorrow. Selling the house was difficult. We gave vague reasons about job changes, wanting to be closer to family. We never mentioned the whispers, the shadows, the suffocating sadness. Who would believe us? Even if they did, who would want to buy a house in a valley haunted by the melancholy cries of lost children? We took a loss, but the relief of finally driving away from that property, watching it shrink in the rearview mirror, was immeasurable. We moved back to the mainland, back to a life that felt blessedly mundane and free of spectral grief. But even now, years later, a sudden mist, a child's distant laugh, or the quiet sound of my name being called will send a jolt of ice through me. The valley's secrets, its unseen children, stay with you. You can leave the place, but the chilling echoes, the profound, inexplicable sadness, they somehow manage to cling to your soul. The ʻIolekaavalley, near Waipahu, Oahu. It may look like paradise, but trust me, it holds a sorrow you never want to hear. If you've ever had an experience like this, where a place felt haunted not by anger, but by an overwhelming, pervasive sadness, let me know in the comments below. I want to know I'm not alone in feeling their silent cries.